The numbers don't lie. Elevation Church claimed 25,000 people came to Jesus last year, but their own leaked documents tell a different story. Attendance is hemorrhaging, donations are plummeting, and the man who built this empire? He's nowhere to be found. What we uncovered in Part 2 will shock you. 25,000 conversions. That's what Elevation Church reported to their donors last year. 25,000 souls saved through Steven Furtick's ministry. But here's what they didn't tell you. Internal attendance records show a different reality. Week after week, month after month, empty seats where packed crowds used to be. You see, in Part 1, we exposed the cracks in Furtick's empire. The fake baptisms, the manufactured moments, the volunteers told to run to the altar to create false excitement. But that was just the beginning, because while Elevation was busy staging their Sunday shows, something else was happening behind the scenes, something they desperately didn't want you to see. Money was disappearing, staff were fleeing, and the man who promised to change Charlotte forever, he was planning his escape. The documents we obtained paint a picture of an organization in complete freefall. Financial records that don't add up, payroll cuts that gutted entire departments, and attendance numbers so bad they stopped reporting them altogether. But here's what really happened when the lights went down and the cameras stopped rolling. Follow the money. That's what every good investigator knows. And when we followed Elevation's money, we found something disturbing. In 2022, Elevation Church reported donations of over $47 million. $47 million. From a congregation that was supposedly growing by leaps and bounds. But then, 2023 happened. $31 million. A $16 million drop in just 12 months. That's not a dip. That's a crater. And it gets worse. Internal payroll documents show massive staff cuts throughout 2023. The worship team? Slashed by 60%. Children's ministry? Half the staff let go. Campus pastors across multiple locations? Gone. But Steven Furtick's salary? Untouched. While his staff was getting pink slips, Furtick maintained his lifestyle. The mansion, the luxury cars, the private jet usage, all funded by donations from people who thought they were supporting ministry. Here's where it gets really interesting. Remember those 25,000 conversions Elevation claimed? We cross-referenced those numbers with their actual attendance data from the same period. The math doesn't work. If 25,000 people really got saved at Elevation Church last year, where are they? Because according to their own internal reports, Sunday attendance actually dropped by 18%. You can't gain 25,000 new believers and lose 18% of your congregation, unless those conversions never happened. But the real smoking gun isn't in the numbers, it's in the silence. Because there's one voice we haven't heard from in all of this chaos. The man who built this empire has gone completely quiet. Steven Furtick built his brand on being everywhere. Social media, conferences, guest appearances. The man who never met a camera he didn't like. Then he disappeared. His last Instagram post, December 15th, 2023. A generic Christmas message with zero engagement from his usual circle. His Twitter? Silent for months. The podcast that used to drop weekly content? Nothing. But here's what's really telling. We reached out to 12 different mega-church pastors who used to regularly platform Furtick. 12 pastors who considered him a close friend and ministry partner. Not one would go on record about his current status. Steven's taking some time away. That's all we got. Time away from what? The ministry he claimed was his life's calling? The people he swore he'd never abandon? Meanwhile, sources inside Elevation tell a different story. Emergency board meetings, closed-door sessions with lawyers, and whispered conversations about reputation management and crisis control. One former staff member, who agreed to speak anonymously, told us something chilling. Leadership knew this was coming. They've been planning damage control for months. Steven wasn't disappearing. He was being disappeared. But by who? And why? The answer lies in what happened at Elevation's campuses, while their lead pastor was in hiding. Because if you thought the fake baptisms were bad, what we discovered about their Sunday services will make your stomach turn. Picture this. You're a new visitor to Elevation Church. You walk into what should be a thriving megachurch on a Sunday morning. The lights are perfect. The band sounds amazing. But something feels wrong. You can't quite put your finger on it until you start counting heads. We sent undercover teams to 5 different Elevation campuses on the same Sunday in March 2024. What they found was theater. Pure theater. Ballantine campus. Capacity: 1,800 people. Actual attendance: 312. That's 17% capacity. But here's the kicker. They positioned those 312 people to make it look full for the cameras. Front sections packed. Back sections cordoned off with reserved signs. Strategic lighting to hide the empty areas. It was a movie set, pretending to be a church. Matthew's campus told the same story. 2,200 capacity. 389 people. 16%. But the live stream? It looked like revival was breaking out. How do you fake a full church? It's easier than you think. Camera angles that never show the back half. Volunteers strategically placed in visible sections. Audio mixing that amplifies the smallest crowd response. And lighting designed to create shadows where empty seats would be obvious. But the most disturbing part wasn't the empty seats. It was what happened when people tried to leave. 3 separate visitors reported the same experience. Exit doors were locked during services. Not for security, for optics. Leadership didn't want anyone walking out on camera. They'd rather trap people inside than admit their empire was crumbling. Internal communications we obtained show explicit instructions to staff. Minimize visible exits during filming. Position volunteers to block sightlines to empty sections. Maintain energy levels regardless of actual attendance. They weren't running a church. They were running a con. But even staged services couldn't hide what was happening to Elevation's finances. Because while they were busy creating the illusion of success, their creditors were circling. And what we found in their debt structure will explain why Steven Furtick really disappeared. Debt. The word that megachurch pastors never want you to hear. But Elevation Church is drowning in it. $43 million. That's how much Elevation owes across 17 different loan agreements. $43 million in debt for a ministry that's hemorrhaging money and members. Here's how deep this goes. Property loans for campuses that sit half-empty. Equipment financing for sound systems worth more than most people's houses. And personal guarantees that put Steven Furtick's own assets on the line. But the real problem isn't the debt, it's the payment schedule. Internal financial documents show balloon payments coming due in 2024 and 2025. Massive lump sums that Elevation simply cannot afford with their current donation levels. We're talking about payments larger than their entire monthly income. So what happens when a megachurch can't pay its debts? We called 12 banks that hold Elevation's loans. None would comment on record. But off the record, 3 separate loan officers used the same word. Concerned. Here's where Furtick's disappearance makes perfect sense. Because when personal guarantees come due and the money isn't there, someone has to answer. Someone has to sign the papers. Someone has to face the music. Unless that someone simply isn't there. Corporate bankruptcy lawyers don't advertise their client lists, but property records tell a story. Steven Furtick quietly moved assets into his wife's name throughout 2023. The mansion, the investment accounts, even the luxury cars. It's called asset protection. And it only makes sense if you know something bad is coming. But here's what Furtick couldn't protect. The thing that mattered most to his brand. Because while he was busy hiding money and dodging creditors, his empire was collapsing in real time. And the people who trusted him, they were about to discover just how far their shepherd would go to save himself. Sarah Matthews gave Elevation Church 15 years of her life. 15 years as a volunteer coordinator. 15 years of unpaid overtime, missed family dinners, and absolute loyalty to Steven Furtick's vision. She quit on a Tuesday. I walked into the volunteer meeting, and there were 8 people. 8. We used to have over 200 volunteers show up for these meetings. That's when I knew it was over. Sarah isn't alone. Internal HR records show a staff exodus unlike anything Elevation has ever seen. Campus pastors, worship leaders, children's ministry directors, administrative staff who'd been there since the beginning, all gone. But it's not just paid staff. The volunteer base that built Elevation's empire is vanishing. Parking lot attendants, greeters, small group leaders. The people who made Sunday mornings look seamless. We obtained internal volunteer tracking data from 2019 through 2024. The numbers are devastating. 2019, 2,847 active volunteers. 2024, 412 active volunteers. That's an 85% drop. But here's what makes this betrayal even worse. While volunteers were abandoning ship, Furtick's inner circle was securing golden parachutes, executive severance packages worth hundreds of thousands, consulting contracts for former staff, even sabbatical pay for people who were already gone. Meanwhile, the volunteers who gave everything, they got nothing. No explanation, no appreciation, no acknowledgement that their sacrifice built everything Furtick claimed as his own success. Janet Rodriguez volunteered in children's ministry for 12 years. I gave my Sundays, my evenings, my vacation time. I believed we were changing lives. Then one day, they just stopped calling. No thank you, no goodbye, nothing. The silence speaks volumes. But the volunteers and staff who left, they're the lucky ones. Because the people who stayed loyal to Steven Furtick are about to discover something that will shatter everything they believed about their church. Something hidden in plain sight that explains why this empire was always doomed to fall. What if everything you believed about your faith was carefully manufactured? What if every spiritual moment was scripted? What if your pastor wasn't teaching God's word, but selling his own brand? We analyzed over 200 Steven Furtick sermons from the past 5 years. What we found isn't Christianity. It's something else entirely. Sermon after sermon focused on one central theme: give more money. But not directly. Furtick was too smart for that. Instead, he wrapped greed in spiritual language that made people feel guilty for not emptying their bank accounts. God is calling you to a greater level of faith, and faith without action is dead. What action is God calling you to take today? Translation: give us your money, or you're not really faithful. Former staff members describe a teaching strategy called emotional manipulation cycles. Create a crisis, offer hope, demand sacrifice, rinse and repeat. But the real spiritual abuse happened in the inner circle, leadership meetings that functioned more like cult indoctrination than church planning. Rebecca Chen was an assistant pastor for 3 years. She agreed to speak anonymously about what she witnessed. Steven demanded absolute loyalty, not to God, not to the church, to him personally. If you questioned anything, you were labeled divisive and pushed out. Questioning Furtick's decisions became questioning God himself. Disagreeing with church strategy became rebellion against divine authority. Staff were taught that opposing Steven Furtick was opposing the Holy Spirit. That's not Christianity. That's narcissistic manipulation wrapped in religious language. Internal emails show Furtick regularly comparing himself to biblical prophets and apostles. Messages to staff referring to criticism as persecution, and positioning himself as a misunderstood visionary chosen by God. The people who trusted him with their spiritual lives were being slowly conditioned to worship the man instead of the message. But there's one piece of this puzzle we haven't revealed yet. The smoking gun that proves this entire empire was built on deception from day one. And when you see it, you'll understand why Steven Furtick had no choice but to disappear. October 23, 2018. An internal strategy meeting that was never supposed to be recorded. But someone hit record anyway. And what Steven Furtick said in that room changes everything. We can't play the full recording for legal reasons, but we can tell you what it contains. 47 minutes of Steven Furtick explaining to his leadership team exactly how to manipulate their congregation for maximum financial gain. Quote, "These people want to feel special. They want to believe God is speaking directly to them, so we give them that feeling, and they give us their wallets. This wasn't a pastor talking about ministry. This was a con man explaining his con. The recording reveals a systematic approach to spiritual manipulation, planned, prophetic words based on demographic data, staged healings using planted volunteers, and a point system for measuring how much money each manipulation technique generated. But here's the part that will make your blood run cold. Furtick and his team specifically targeted vulnerable people, recent widows, families facing medical crises, people drowning in debt who could least afford to give. They called it crisis evangelism. We'd call it predatory behavior. Quote, "When people are desperate, they'll believe anything, and desperate people give sacrificially." That recording was made 6 years ago, which means everything Elevation Church has done since then, every service, every campaign, every miracle moment, was part of a calculated strategy to extract money from broken people. But someone in that room kept a copy. Someone who knew this day would come. Someone who waited for the right moment to expose the truth. 3 weeks ago, that recording was quietly delivered to law enforcement, not just local police, federal investigators, the IRS, and journalists across the country. Steven Furtick didn't disappear because he was tired. He didn't vanish because he needed rest. He ran because he knew the walls were closing in. But running only delays the inevitable, because while Furtick has been hiding, the investigation has been expanding. And what authorities are discovering goes far beyond one current pastor's. Federal investigators don't waste time on small-time fraud. When they open a case, it's because they've found something massive, something that connects to other cases, other churches, other empires built on lies. The Elevation Church investigation has triggered a domino effect across the mega-church world, because Steven Furtick wasn't operating alone. Banking records show financial connections between Elevation and 17 other mega-churches across the country, shared vendors, joint marketing campaigns, and most importantly, identical manipulation techniques. It wasn't coincidence. It was coordination. Documents obtained through Freedom of Information requests reveal a network of mega-church pastors sharing strategies for maximizing donations, email chains discussing emotional trigger points, conference calls about donor psychology. They called themselves the Kingdom Business Network, but there was nothing godly about their business model. Carl Lentz from Hillsong, Mark Driscoll from Mars Hill, now Steven Furtick from Elevation. Different churches, different scandals, but identical playbooks. Create a brand around the pastor's personality, manufacture emotional experiences, target vulnerable people, extract maximum donations, and when it all falls apart, disappear with the money. Federal forensic accountants are now tracing money flows between these churches going back 15 years, consulting fees that were really kickbacks, mission trips that funded luxury lifestyles, building funds that built mansions instead of churches. But here's what makes this investigation different. Someone on the inside is talking, someone with access to everything, someone who kept records when everyone else was burning them. IRS agents raided Elevation's headquarters last Tuesday. They left with 47 boxes of documents, financial records, email archives, and something else that could bring down the entire network. The master list, every donor's personal information, every manipulation technique used on specific individuals, every dollar extracted through spiritual abuse, all documented, all traceable, all evidence. This isn't just about Steven Furtick anymore. This is about a systematic pattern of religious fraud that spans decades and involves hundreds of millions of dollars. But the most shocking revelation is still coming. Because while investigators have been following the money, they've discovered something that makes all the financial crimes look small. What we're about to tell you goes beyond financial fraud, beyond spiritual manipulation, beyond everything we've exposed so far. People died. Margaret Thompson, 67 years old, diabetic, living on a fixed income. In 2022, She gave her last $4,000 to Elevation Church after Steven Furtick convinced her that God would heal her if she sowed a seed of faith. She died 3 months later, alone, broke, still waiting for her miracle. Margaret isn't the only one. Medical records cross-referenced with donation data tell a horrifying story. Terminal cancer patients giving their treatment money. Heart disease sufferers skipping medication to fund Elevation's building projects. At least 17 documented cases of people who died after giving away money they needed for medical care. 17 families destroyed by a pastor who promised healing in exchange for cash. But Steven Furtick knew. Internal emails show leadership was aware that vulnerable people were bankrupting themselves for false promises. And they didn't care. Quote from a 2023 leadership email. Desperate people give the most. Don't discourage sacrificial giving, even if it seems excessive. Excessive. That's how they described people dying for their greed. This is why Steven Furtick disappeared. This is why federal agents are involved. This is why the investigation has expanded beyond financial fraud. When spiritual manipulation kills people, it becomes something else entirely. Sources close to the investigation tell us charges are coming. Not just for fraud, for manslaughter, for running a criminal enterprise disguised as a church. The empire is crumbling, the truth is spreading, and Steven Furtick is running out of places to hide. But here's what they don't want you to know. Elevation Church isn't shutting down. They're rebranding. New name, new leadership, same manipulation tactics. And they're targeting a new demographic. College students, young professionals, people who've never heard of Steven Furtick or his crimes. The cycle is starting again, right now, in a city near you. Which means this story isn't over, it's just beginning. Part 3 drops next Tuesday. And what we've uncovered about Elevation's successor organization will make everything you've heard today look like child's play. Because some empires don't fall, they just change their name and find new victims.